Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the candidate forum for the 14th Middlesex District. We have with us tonight Simon Cataldo, the Democrat, and Rodney Cleaves, the Republican. And this evening is being brought to you as a collaboration between the League of Women Voters of Concord-Carlisle and of Acton area. So thank you so much for coming. Just a few logistics for things for tonight. One is that this is being taped by Minuteman Media, and it will be available on the websites of both League of Women Voters Concord-Carlisle and Acton area afterwards. And it will also be available for all cable access channels that are covered by the district. A few other logistics things. One is you saw that you have cards and pencils in your seats, and those are for the second part of the forum will allow you to ask your own questions. So write them as legibly and as briefly and as succinctly and pithily as you possibly can. And if you put your hand up, someone will come and take them, and they will be adequately brought to the table over there and then brought up to the moderator. Then the usual things. Keep your phone off, please. No verbal recognition of anything that's said, no clapping till the end, and other than that, enjoy. At this point, I can introduce our moderator to you, Nancy Brumbach. We're very lucky to have. She's a trained league moderator, and she's also the past president of the Sudbury League, and she also is the vice chair of the legislation committee at the state level. So we're very, very pleased to have her tonight. So with that, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll add my welcome to all of you. As Nancy mentioned, I live in Sudbury. I don't vote in this district. I have no skin in this game. Before we start, a brief review of the format for tonight's forum. We're going to start with a 90-second opening statement from each candidate, and then I will call on the candidates to answer questions alternating who goes first. Candidates will have 90 seconds to answer each question. 30 seconds rebuttals will be allowed at my discretion. Please raise your hand, candidates, to signal if you want a rebuttal, or just say rebuttal if I don't see you. And each candidate will have a chance to respond during a rebuttal. My preference is to do few rebuttals and more questions. We're going to start with prepared questions, and then, as Nancy mentioned, take written questions from you, from the audience. Please write legibly. Finally, each candidate will give a 90-second closing statement. There's a timer in the front row. She'll warn them when there's 15 seconds to the end of the time, and then hold up a stop sign. We'll cut them off at the end of the sentence. One note, this event is occurring on October 11th, so if you are watching it later and some significant event has occurred after October 11th, we won't be covering it. That has come up. You know, something happened, and they say, why didn't you talk about that? Because it hadn't happened. So we're going to start now with the 90-second opening statements. The order was determined by a coin toss, and Mr. Cataldo will go first. So your 90 seconds.
I want the coin toss.
Oh, I thought you said you wanted him to go first.
No, then I took it back.
Oh. You see, now my whole script is wrong. But you go first, and we'll take it from there.
I don't think it matters much, really. My name's Rod Cleaves. After graduating high school, I went into the Air Force. After the Air Force, for 5 years, I was in private industry. I was a technologist for about 42, 43 years, mostly in the training departments of the high-tech industry. I taught people how to maintain and build computers. And I also published documentation, both under my own name and under corporate names, to continue those. And I was a course developer as well. After private industry, I went to work for the Veterans Administration. Basically, after 9/11, I felt like I had to do something more patriotic. So I went to work for the VA and eventually became the Chief Information Officer at the VA in Bedford. Retired about 2.5 years ago. And through this whole time, my wife and I have had well over 500 children and families hosted at our house over the years, some disabled, some just came from the Department of Children and Family as foster children. Also have had about 7 dogs. So I know what it's like at the end of their life, believe me. And really, that's my qualification. I'm just going to stick with my life experience more than my resume. I'm educated well beyond my intelligence and culminating in a doctorate degree, but I don't want to trade on that because it's really not germane to what we're doing here. And that's me.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Cataldo for 90 seconds.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to everybody who's watching here and at home. And thank you to Rod for your service and for running. My name is Simon Cataldo. I'm running to be your next state representative. If you voted for me in September, thank you. I am profoundly honored to be one of your choices in this general election. And if you haven't voted for me, I hope to earn your vote by November 8th. Running to be our next state rep was my first time doing anything political. I started out studying environmental science, became a special education math teacher with Teach for America, and then launched what's now a national nonprofit for at-risk youth called Harlem Lacrosse. I served in the United States Justice Department, prosecuting all sorts of public corruption offenses with the intention of preserving and protecting the integrity of our government. Now I live here in Concord, where I grew up and went to our public schools with my wife, Jessie, and our 2 toddlers. So far in this campaign, my biggest lesson has been the power of persistent positive messaging. We've knocked on over 30,000 doors in the district, and we've kept the focus on what government can do to address our collective challenges, making sure that we have clean and safe drinking water in our communities, affordable access to mental and reproductive health care, strong public infrastructure, and excellent schools for our children that meets both our economic and educational needs. I'm really looking forward to discussing the issues with all of you tonight.
Thank you. And now we'll move to the questions. Question 1. You are sitting next to someone on an airplane who is not from Massachusetts, but is very interested that you're running for state representative from the 14th Middlesex District. They have asked you to describe the district that you're representing. How do you respond? Starting with Mr. Cleaves.
Thank you. Rather than belay the issue after every question, I'm just going to say thank you for having me and thank you for the questions. After this, I'll just move right into them. Madam Passenger, the district I have in Massachusetts, a lot of people know Massachusetts, a very blue state. This particular district is quite varied. We've got some blue-collar towns, we've got some white-collar towns. And it's tough to support an opinion for every town here. I would tell them that we're principally Carlisle and those parts of Acton, Concord, and Chelmsford that touch Carlisle. And it's difficult to look at all of them. There are parts of the state laws and state regulations that force us to do something for the entire district that some towns simply can't do. And there are some issues amongst the towns like Acton has a lot more transient housing, apartments, things like this, students that still live there. Chelmsford is a little bit more solid. Concord and Carlisle tend to have a little bit more of a professional bent in their population. But even with that, it's all varied and there are all changes from one town to the other. So it's a very homogeneous district. And it's going to be tough to be able to handle it, but handle it we will.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo, how do you describe the 14th?
I'd probably start by explaining to the passenger that gerrymandering was invented in Massachusetts. And unfortunately, we've stuck true to our roots. So we have, in Massachusetts, really strong networks, socially, economically, educational, that are built around the town model. But in the 14th Middlesex District, we have 3 towns that are split up in one Carlisle that's whole. But I think that there are some really important themes that are unifying us, both in terms of values and our challenges. So in all of our towns, public education is really important. It's a source of pride. It's one of the reasons that people move here, come back here, and stay here for a long time. This is a part of Massachusetts that really cares about conservation in the environment. It's another source of pride for our community, and it's something that we want to see play out on the state level. We also have common challenges in terms of mental health care, housing, and transportation that are well aligned to some of the opportunities we have in the state legislature, and that's something we're going to need to rally around as a district.
Thank you. Question 2. As I think you know, the 14th Middlesex District is one of 20 districts in the Commonwealth that will have 2 additional non-binding questions, ballot questions in November. One of the questions is on requiring the transparency of votes in legislative committees. This is how the question reads. Shall the representative, that would be you, for this district be instructed to vote in favor of changes to the applicable House of Representative rules to make each legislator's vote in that body's legislative committees publicly available on the legislature's website? Right now, they are not publicly available. What is your view on this question? And if the district votes yes on it, what would you do? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
A year ago, when I started running, I made the commitment before this was on the ballot and before I knew about this ballot question that I was going to make my committee votes public, and that's what I intend to do. So regardless of what happens with this ballot initiative, that's my plan. I think that that is an expectation of the voters in this district, the residents of this district. We have we had a very strong proponent of transparency who held this seat and is holding this seat, who I hope to succeed, and that's my plan for that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves.
This law has been, it's basically mirroring what the majority of the cities and towns have done throughout the state. When I was in Maynard, I worked on the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, and we could not hold an ex parte meeting, without being in the public eye or without having it registered and properly noted. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement of this, and I would vote for it. If we're not having transparent in our government, then we're in a lot of trouble. And at the federal level today, I'm not sure we're getting any sense of transparency. So I think we need some transparency here. And I would vote for this, and I would encourage my friends to vote for it.
As you probably know, the legislature exempted itself from the open meeting laws. So
correct.
The third question, and it's about the second non-binding ballot question in the 20 districts. And that question is on single-payer health care. The question reads, shall the representative from this district be instructed to vote for legislation to create a single-payer system of universal health care that provides all Massachusetts residents with comprehensive health care coverage, including the freedom to choose doctors and other health care professionals, facilities, and services, and eliminates the role of insurance companies in healthcare by creating an insurance trust fund that is publicly administered. Got that? What is your view on this question? And if the district votes yes, what would you do? Starting with Mr. Cleaves.
To be honest with you, I haven't read this bill in its entirety. The way you read it, I was under the impression it was for the low income.
This is a universal single payer Medicare for all kind of health care plan.
Okay, I'm philosophically opposed to something like that. It completely eliminates the sense of competition and basically capitalism. The reason we have the health care we have now, flawed as it is because companies compete for your services. I was under the impression that, and I'm wrong on this, I do apologize, that this was for low-income people who couldn't otherwise afford it, basically an adjunct to what we call Obamacare. So I would not vote for this. It just doesn't fit well with me.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
I'm in favor of single-payer health care. One of the challenges that we're facing right now is with the bargaining power that all of us have as recipients, as seekers of healthcare services. One of the things that single-payer healthcare does is increase the bargaining power that Medicaid and Medicare have and apply that to all of us. That's a really good thing. Another challenge that we're facing is the transparency around prescription drug prices, which makes it a lot harder to get the drugs that we need to keep ourselves healthy, cure our illnesses at a level that we can afford. And transparency is increased by a single-payer system. I think that's the way to go for us. I also think that it will help reduce costs overall. We basically already have a single-payer system for children and seniors. The administrative costs for those levels, those people are getting a lot more health care than the rest of us in the middle, are about 1/3 of the people in the middle. So it's the best thing to do for our pocketbooks, for our bargaining power and leverage, and for transparency.
Nancy, please.
Okay.
Short.
30 seconds again.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. Anytime someone offers a service, you have to pay for the service. And if you're going to pay a certain value, they have to give you the proper value for the services they offered you. One thing we know for certain, aside from death and taxes, is every time the government meddles with the fundamental finances of our lives, try to control the economy or try to control the social fabric of what we do, they screw up. It just, this is one of those things that sounds good.
Mr. Cataldo, you want another 30 seconds?
No, thank you.
We go to question 4. What, if any, legislation do you think should we put in place to handle, to handle changes in climate and environment that negatively impact residents and businesses in the Commonwealth, starting with Mr. Cataldo?
Thank you. And we can't answer this question without acknowledging the great work that the legislature has recently done to usher forward what I think is widely considered to be nation-leading legislation in Massachusetts on these issues. One of the main challenges that we have ahead of us is fortifying our electric grid to ensure that we are able to pump as much green energy as is needed, as is desired, through to our homes, to our transportation systems. So I'd be looking at legislative initiatives and budget decisions that would give us the electric grid that we need to safely have the green economy that we want. We also need to acknowledge and embrace that there is massive economic opportunity in having a green economy, building green infrastructure. And it's a great time to be talking about this because we know from the federal government about $9 billion is going to be available to Massachusetts. The way that Build Back Better Act works is that it is going to be incumbent upon our state government, our legislature, and our agencies to be reaching out to get that money in building up our green infrastructure. We need to be proactive on that issue, and I'm excited to do that on our behalf as our state rep.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves.
I have to wonder where all this money is coming from someday, but again, we get into this balancing act. Every bit of energy we have, from our own breath to what we run in our cars, our houses, everything, is God-given, or if you wish, universe-given. It either comes from the sun, it comes from our fossil fuels, it comes from hydro possibly. Nuclear is still out there as an option if we can figure out how to get rid of the waste safely. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the infrastructure we have is old, and we need to get it fixed, we need to get it capable. But the green energy initiatives that are all happening, all you're really doing is you're saying, don't charge my car up with energy at my house. Charge it up from energy that I got from, Haverhill, and they're going to pipe it in. So now Haverhill has more, pollution. The energy you're using comes from somewhere. Let's find a way to use all of it efficiently and safely. One thing I'd like to see us go back to is hybrid cars. That's just one small thing. I had a Prius. I loved it. I really liked getting that 72 miles per gallon when I had it. And what it meant was I used very little gas and just kept the car running on the engine that basically kept recharging the batteries that kept me going. But we're ravaging the earth for lithium, then we throw it away and dump it again somewhere. We just can't turn it on and off like that.
Thank you. The next question, if elected, which House committees and subcommittees will you seek to be appointed to? and why these choices? Starting with Mr. Cleaves.
The one hot spot I have for me, and you probably already guessed it from my introduction, is the Department of Children and Families. One of the initiatives my wife and a friend of hers did was they created a thing called the Foster Parents Bill of Rights. Because what we found is that, I'm just going to say this. I'm not going to go into a long lesson on it, but DCF is a mess. I call them the Department of Duck and Cover, or the Duck and Cover Fraternity, sorry. Because they lie to the foster parents, they deceive them, they tell foster parents one thing and the kids that they're dropping off another. They drop off kids without paperwork, even though they're not allowed to do that. I want to be on whatever committees I can find myself on that have some oversight in the Department of Children and Families, and I will put the majority of my energy into that. That doesn't mean I won't ignore any other departments. I'd love to get on a Ways and Means, but I'm sure as an entry-level representative, that has probably not going to be possible. But that's my one hot spot right there.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo, what committees are you aiming for?
As a freshman, I think either of us will probably have little choice over the matter, at least at the beginning. I'd like to be on Ways and Means too, by the way, Rod. If I had the choice, my first choice would be the Telecommunications, Energy, and Utilities and Energy Committee, TUE. That's where a lot of the work that concerns our climate crisis, a lot of the work that's happening with the safety of our public transportation system is happening there. Those are really big issues. They matter quite a bit for our district in terms of commuting, climate, energy conservation. I'd like to apply some of my background in environmental science in my legal background to the benefit of that committee's work.
Thank you. Okay, stay with me here. The next question has two parts. In the first part, I will list the 4 statewide ballot questions and ask you to give your position on it with a simple yes or no, how you're going to vote on the 4 statewide ballot questions.
I don't think I can handle just yes or no.
Well, that's the second part is you have 90 seconds each to talk about any one or all, any of the ballot questions that come up, why you're voting yes or no on any of them. So first, let's find out how you're voting. So on question 1, the additional 4% state income tax on income over $1 million, a yes supports that question. Mr. Cataldo?
Yes.
Mr.
No,
Cleaves?
unequivocally.
Okay, see, we've got a division right there. Question 2, regulation of dental insurance by requiring insurance companies to spend at least 83% of their premium revenues on actual dental expenses. Yes supports the change. Mr. Cleaves?
No.
Yes.
Okay. Question 3, expanding the availability of licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages. A yes supports the change. Mr. Cataldo?
Yes.
Yes.
And finally, question 4, to uphold the recently enacted law for obtaining a driver's license without proof of citizenship. A yes keeps the law in place, a no vote repeals it. Mr. Cataldo?
Yes.
No.
Now, you each will have 90 seconds to say why you're voting that way on any or all of those questions, starting with Mr. Cataldo.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll start with the last one, number 4. Number 4 is a public safety measure. It's a law that was passed overwhelmingly by both chambers of our state legislature. It keeps our roads safer by making sure that people have driver's tests, that they are insured. It keeps us, it makes it much more likely that if you get into an accident, the other car in that accident will have insurance. This is a law that is supported by all of the major municipalities' police chiefs. I'm one of the majority, as far as I can tell, of people who are currently or formerly in law enforcement who support this public safety measure. The main argument against it that I've heard has to do with voting. That argument is specious. We do not have a widespread voter fraud issue in Massachusetts. Our elections are secure. They're well run. They're run by our Secretary of the Commonwealth and people who you know in your own communities. And baked into this law is a measure, it's the last section of the law, Section 9, that would prevent that requires the Secretary of State and the RMV to prevent anybody getting a driver's license under this law from being registered to vote automatically. So I support question 4 for those reasons.
Mr. Cleaves, your
I have
thoughts
to
on the
think
ballot
about
question?
this. Looks like we're going to settle down on question 4. But I'm going to start with the dental insurance one. The idea that the legislature can regulate 83% of all collected premiums to go to dental services, again, we get into this balancing act. Where do they come up with the number 83%? You know, if we want to regulate what a company can make for profit one way or the other, all they're going to do is decide to raise the rates or give you less services for more profit, or worse yet, they'll leave the Commonwealth. You know, Allstate did it years ago. They're back now, but they left when Obamacare kicked in. Going back to the illegal license issue, there's one issue that we're actually in agreement on, and I actually split with my own party on this. It could be perceived as a public safety issue. I don't believe so, because people that want to drive are driving. I was out collecting signatures for this thing. I collected 1,400 signatures for this issue, and a little over 900 of them got certified. I actually had people coming up to me that are citizens who came from another country legally and couldn't wait to sign. I had other people that came up to me and basically, they gave me a hard time. Whoops. As far as the voter integrity rule, I'm going to show you this if I have it. Our voter registration rolls are a mess, and nobody wants to admit it. See this? You all got one. There are 2 voters in my house. We got 2 of them. Years ago, I got 4 of them. No, our rolls are not secure. I can't believe for 1 minute we have good voting rolls, and I do apologize. Thank you.
Well, you're leading into the next question. So question 7 is, do you have concerns about the fairness, the accessibility, and the fidelity of our electoral process? If so, what are your concerns, and how, as a legislator, do you think we should address them? And if you don't have concerns, why do you feel the current system is working? Starting with Mr. Cleaves.
I think I already touched on that. Thank you. I was a poll worker for quite some time. And all I'm going to tell you, as a poll worker, I had one person come up to me and presented me with an ID. He didn't have to. I was in the greeter position. And it turns out he gives me a driver's license, which looks very familiar to me. It was a friend of mine's name and address. I didn't question it. I wasn't allowed to question it. And I said, oh, I think I know this guy. And he goes, no, I'm his son. So fine, checked him in, moved him on. Later that day, because I worked the entire day, I was in the check-in position where the guy who actually hands the ballot to somebody, and my friend showed up, and he was able to vote. I could check him off. So whoever checked in under one name voted under some other name if they voted at all. And I'll tell you this, as a foster parent, one day I went to vote, and I said, okay, this is my address, and you see the names under it. We've all done that. 3 of the people registered to vote at my house were foster kids from Africa who did not have any citizenship rights to vote. We are putting voter registration, citizenship vetting in the hands of the RMV. The Secretary of State's not going to do it. I'm sorry, he says he's going to, but I know this guy. I know how this system works. It's not going to happen. You'll find a few every now and then and proclaim victory. But no, our voter registration rolls, I don't like the way this happens.
The question is, what would you do about it?
What would I do about it?
Yeah,
well,
as a legislator.
As a freshman legislature, there's not a whole lot I can do. That's why I got to get in there and start making some noise. First off, we would do our best to make sure that the Secretary of State actually follows his own rules about vetting the people. I would also try to take it away from but take away the citizenship vetting from the RMV for one thing.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo, on elections.
I don't have major concerns about the integrity of our electoral process. I say that to you as a voter, as a candidate, and as somebody who's worked at the highest level on election integrity cases at the U.S. Justice Department. What I do have concerns about are specious, arguments and stories that are diminishing people's trust in government. We're living in a time when that is our greatest threat. We do have real problems, however. We have problems that involve our climate, our transportation, our economy, our system of education, and basically everything else that touches your life. As your state representative, I will go to work to address those problems. I will not try to manufacture issues that don't need to be discussed. We have plenty of actual work to do, and I'm really excited to go to work on your behalf on those issues.
Thank you.
I know I already took extra
No,
time.
you had a little bit extra time, so
Okay.
I'm not going to go.
We'll let that go.
Question 8. In light of the recent charter flight moving asylum seekers unannounced to Martha's Vineyard, is there anything the Massachusetts legislature can do or should do to address situations like that? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
Yeah, it is tragic and angering and frustrating that any public official would use human beings as a stunt. As your state legislature, I will not do that. I will denounce anybody who does do that, whether they're in the state legislature or otherwise. In the United States, we're a nation of laws. What happened was illegal. To trick people into boarding a flight to Martha's Vineyard when they thought they were going to Florida, where they had family members, is not only ethically wrong, it's legally wrong. In terms of what the legislature could do in order to prevent that, in our country, as all of us, or most of us are probably well aware, most of our laws surrounding international immigration are done at the federal level, and that's a boundary that has to be respected because of a number of legal and constitutional doctrines. I do whatever I could possibly do to make sure that we are treating the people who are here with dignity and making sure that all of us are as safe as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves.
Yes, we are a nation of laws, and if we don't have a border, we have no nation. That's all there is to it. I don't have any evidence that those people were tricked into going someplace they didn't want to go. In fact, just the opposite. Governor DeSantis from Florida said that these people wanted to go to Martha's Vineyard where there was an opportunity for employment. Now, Martha's Vineyard is not a sanctuary city or town, so I guess they can get rid of them if they want to. Here's a question for you. Your own town of Concord is a sanctuary city. You've decided that for yourself. Why don't next time we bring a railroad car of people up from the southern border and drop them off in West Concord? I'm sure you can find space for them. I'm sure you can find employment for them. You have low-income housing. Perhaps you can arrange that. But these people are crossing the border in droves, and that's a federal problem, and the current administration is ignoring the laws that are on the books. We have 49 points of entry and a 50th one being built now along the southern border. They could just as easily line up and do it right. We've ignored the stay in Mexico bill. We've ignored anything that has to do with the first country you cross. You've got to stay there. We are being inundated virtually. If all these people come across the border were wearing a uniform, we'd say it was an invasion. But as far as the thing coming to Martha's Vineyard, it may have been a stunt. And I'm going to say a few seconds of that. But having been a stunt or not, it certainly brought it a little bit more into the limelight where it hadn't been in the limelight before. It's been covered up.
Thank you.
May I?
Okay. You each get another 30 seconds on this.
Thank you.
I'll yield my 30 seconds back.
The people who came here, who were boarded onto that plane, were here legally. We're a nation of laws. They were here to declare amnesty.
I'll let it go.
Okay, we'll go on here. Do you think Massachusetts should adopt same-day voter registration, which allows qualified people to register and then vote during the early voting period and on election day? Why or why not? Starting with Mr. Cleaves.
Well, I'll go back to what I said before. Who are you going to maintain? Who are you going to charge with vetting someone for their citizenship status? No, there's no way you can verify that the person walks in to a polling place or goes down to town hall before going to a polling place, that they're gonna vet that person properly. Just because they show up with, I don't know, perhaps a driver's license obtained illegally or a utility bill and says, yeah, I live over at 123 anyway, my name's John Smith. There's no way to vet that person. No, I cannot possibly support that. Sometimes I even wonder if the 15-day, I think it's 15 days, I could be wrong on that. 10 days, okay. Rule, I think that's too quick. I think it should be at least 30 days. But that's my opinion. No, I won't go along with that at all.
Mr. Cataldo.
So we do actually already have some same-day voting registration as a result of the Votes Act, because they've moved up the early voting period and meanwhile shortened the amount of time prior to the date of the election. So I went with a friend actually during the primary. He registered to vote and voted for the first time on the first day of early voting. I think that we need to take a wholesome look at this because there have been a lot of changes recently. I agree in principle with same-day voting registration. I have also heard some pushback from people who work in election offices about some of the administrative burdens that are not yet funded in terms of our election system. So I think we need to look at everything we have now. I think we need to make it as easy to vote as humanly possible, whether that means move it from 10 to 5, keep it at 10, or put it at same day for every single day that you can show up to vote. I'm open-minded about that, and I want to have more conversations about that in light of all of the new information that we have, the thousands and thousands of data points we have from this last election.
Thank you. What did you learn during your campaigning that will make you a better state representative? Start with Mr. Cataldo.
Thank you for that question. So many learnings. As I mentioned before, this is my first time doing anything political. I have more hope in our government, our ability to make progress, and our democracy today than I did when I declared myself as a candidate. The main reason is that in our district, we have so much energy, so much positivity, so many people who are working at the local level to get a lot of things done on everything from home energy retrofits to transportation to our housing groups. We have so many people in this district who give me quite a bit of hope, both local elected leaders and volunteers. And I think that we can get a lot done. And what I want to do as your state rep is be a conduit for this incredible district to state government. I have a lot of hope in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves.
This is my first outing into politics as well. I never wanted to be a politician. I never expected to be a politician. I wasn't groomed to be a politician. I don't have the lawyer type expertise. But if I learned anything, I learned that I can approach anybody and talk to them about almost anything they want to talk about, and accept their point of view and exchange my points of view. And when we're done, we're done. It's amazing how many times I've disagreed with people and we've actually parted friendly. I had one guy who disagreed with me on everything I had to say. And when we were done, he banged on my table, and I thought I was going to get in trouble. And he goes, "I won't vote for you, but if you do get elected, I won't freak out." And I thought that was one of the best compliments I ever heard anybody give me. You know, I spent a lot of time at the Carlisle transfer station when I was collecting signatures, and I met a lot of terrific people, and none of them agreed with me on anything. But we had wonderful conversations, and I think in my life, I've always kind of been a little bit thin-skinned, and I've shied away from that kind of thing. But somehow, and I think Simon will agree with me on this, you're out there talking to people, and you're pushing your opinion, and you end up in this sort of bubble where nobody can really hurt you anymore. You have an opinion, you're expressing your opinion, and I also solidified my own opinions in many ways that I really never had to do before.
Thank you. We're going to go now to questions that you all have submitted. I think the screeners over here sometimes have combined similar questions into one. If we don't get to your question, feel free to come up and ask these gentlemen after the program.
I'm going to run after this.
You can get to the door first. Okay, Massachusetts has a huge need for affordable housing and middle-income housing. What should the legislature do to address the housing crisis in Massachusetts? And starting with Mr. Cleaves.
Boy, that's a good one. The family that's living with me right now, woman, her boyfriend, their child, and 2 dogs, would be someone that could qualify very easily for low-income housing, and they just can't get there yet. I was shocked to see how nice the low-income housing here in Concord is. You guys are doing a great job. The problem is the state doesn't build the house. The state and the city don't build the house. You got to get some financing going. By the way, this goes back to the insurance question, because a lot of the financing for the housing comes from the insurance companies. Drive the dental insurance out of the state. You're going to lose that too. But I don't know what we can do. I think we could have some better Section 8 housing, because right now that people that can get into a low-income housing are subsidized by some federal grants, some state grants, and in some cases, some local grants. And that's really about all the town, state, and federal can do is dole out more money. We can incentivize the contractors and the developers for a better housing, perhaps. I've seen a lot of what look like condo-esque buildings going up that are really sort of a moderate income housing. And, they're doing very well. The question is, how much of that do you want to have in your town, and how much of it do you want to have on the edges of your town? Are we back into this not in my backyard situation again? So it's got to tread carefully.
Thank you, Mr. Cataldo, on housing.
Thanks, Nancy. I have 2 main thoughts on this issue from my conversations with housing advocates and people who live in subsidized and low-income housing in our district. The first is that the state government has not been a good partner for our housing authorities in making the capital investments that we need for upkeep for our existing public and subsidized housing units. That's especially true in Chelmsford. I think it's true around the district. So we need to make sure that we are taking good care of what we have now. The people who live in those units, they're seniors, veterans, lower income families, they deserve to live with dignity, and all of us are better off if they can do so. So there are investments on the order of a few $1 billion from the housing advocates who I've talked to that need to be made, and I'd be wanting to work on that. The other thing that I believe is that we've been going about this backwards. We're all stick and no carrot when it comes to incentives or disincentives for housing and developing low-income housing or affordable housing in our community. I'd like to see the state come in, figure out what the towns need that we can't pay for with our property taxes, and start building in some incentives to build more flexibility, partner with developers, and achieve some of our local and the regional goals that we have for housing.
I have a non-rebuttal.
Very quickly.
I agree with you. I especially like what you said about less stick and more carrot. And this goes to the idea that every time the state and federal gets involved in something, they just screw it up. We need to find a way to get to the local areas. Let the towns decide what they need, and then come in and give them a hand.
Thank you. You want to say anything else? You're good?
I don't believe that the government always messes everything up, but thank you, Rod.
Okay, here's another question. I am an educator concerned about not especially qualified politicians interfering in educational decisions. Where do you stand? And start with Mr. Cataldo.
I think that traditionally in Massachusetts, we have left it to our local public school districts to make the vast majority of decisions as it concerns our public education in our schools. In our school districts, that has gone quite well. There are very few times, I think, recently when the state legislature has done anything to affect actual curriculum in our schools. One of the recent examples of that was a statewide genocide education bill, which I supported. I think that was one of the rare instances where, in my view, that sort of intervention was very appropriate. But in general, I think the principle that one principle we've benefited from in our district is that our towns and our school boards and our teachers and administrators do a great job by and large of running our schools.
Mr. Cleaves.
I understand the timbre of the question, but I have a little bit of a disagreement with it. I was an educator. I taught in industry for 25 years, and I also taught at the college level, and that's why I got my advanced degree, because I wanted to teach. I ran for Chelmsford School Committee because I wanted to see some changes made and some oversight and some direction. But as far as what we can change, to be honest with you, Massachusetts is actually doing a fairly decent job from what I see from other school districts around the country. We've got it. I think we've got it. I do worry about some of the indoctrination. I hear it all the time from the federal media, whatnot, that there are certain things that should not be involved in school. I'm more of a writing, reading, arithmetic kind of guy. I believe very strongly in the soft sciences. I love history and social studies. I stink at math. Don't ask me to teach math. But these areas need to be solidified and brought into line with reality, not some ideological desire to mold our children into a particular box that really is a very minority point of view. And that's the part that scares me the most. But for the overall, I'll say, Massachusetts schools aren't all that bad. The schools I worry about are New York and California schools.
Okay,
May I, briefly?
very briefly,
Thank you, Nancy.
because we have a stack of questions from the group here. Let's go on. Why is it important that the legislature approve the budget by the end of the fiscal year, and what would you do to influence the House culture so that this doesn't happen at 2 o'clock in the morning on July 31st, so that we don't have this last-minute crunch? And starting with Mr. Cleaves.
When I was the chief information officer at the VA, it seemed like the fiscal year always crept up on us, even though it was on the calendar for a whole year. The legislature can do the same. It doesn't have to be last minute. It's a matter of combination of procrastination and maybe a few shenanigans by people who want to drive something through at the last minute when they think no one's going to be looking because they're too busy worrying about everything else. There has to be, this goes back to the question about, wishing I could get the seniority on day one to be on the Ways and Means Committee, because I'd like to see the fiscal budget start being looked at a good 6 months early. It should be settled by the time the fiscal year ends and not a 2 o'clock in the morning problem. And I'm speaking now in terms of wish it could be. And there's always going to be someone that comes up at the last minute. There's going to be someone who says, well, we need this housing project over here. Okay, we'll work it in. But the basics of every budget that comes down, 80% of it's really already set. It's just a matter of confirming it and examining it and signing off on it and adding a little here and subtracting a little there. But for the most part, what we're spending our money on doesn't change year to year. It's a matter of how much revenue we have and how much more money we can spend. That's about it.
Thank you. Mr. Cataldo.
The issues involving timeliness have real practical effects on some important priorities that both the legislature and the current governor have had. Tax credits for seniors and for child care, even the money, the $125 or so million that needs to be spent to implement the recent climate change bill, that's in the economic development bill that was not passed. So we really need to get on it. I don't think there's any special formula, necessarily any legislative deadline that we need to impose. We need to do what you do in any situation when something's important. You plan and you get it done. I hope you'll vote for whoever you think will do that on all of our issues, including our budget issues and our substantive legislation.
Thank you. Here's a good one for you. How do you plan to address the traffic and infrastructure problems in our district? Starting with Mr. Cataldo.
So one of the opportunities that we have, as we mentioned earlier, is we have about $9 billion coming from the federal government as part of the Build Back Better Act to Massachusetts specifically for infrastructure. So it is going to be your state legislature's job to make sure that we are drawing resources to our district for the forward-thinking projects that are needed to meet the moment of the challenges we're facing. Our current commuter rail is not sufficiently reliable or frequent to meet the needs that we have in our community, which is why so many of our residents from our area are driving to the seaport to work. Which makes it, as we know, so difficult for us. We have some really great opportunities as it has to do with some local projects like Crosstown Connect, you may have heard of, has been very successful in Acton. We need to draw resources from the state and federal level to help people use that resource to get around. As many of you know, I would like to see an overpass at the Route 2 Rotary that will free up economic development in our region. It will make all of our mental health much better. It will make us far safer. But those are the type of projects that we're going to need strong legislators on Beacon Hill working with our representatives in U.S. Congress to make sure we can draw resources to the district to address that.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves.
Boy, I could have used that overpass tonight. I was late getting here. I was stuck in the Rotary, or getting to the Rotary, actually. This country was obsessed with infrastructure from the 30s through the mid-60s, and then somehow we just sat back and said, it's going to last, let's not worry about it. And we started looking at other things. We started thinking that, I'm not sure what we started thinking about, to be honest with you. And now we're paying the price because we're looking at crumbling roads, crumbling bridges. We're looking at inadequate roads. And that's a generality. That's a generality. There are some specifics, and I know we have about $9 billion coming through from taxpayers. And why is the MBTA the T rather so structured the way it is? I don't know. Is it because we're not hiring the right people, not paying them enough, maybe paying them too much to sit around and do nothing? Or is it inadequate oversight from management that simply says, fix that rail, get it done? But no, you know what? They go out and they stand around, and I've watched this. I've watched crews standing around waiting for the next guy to come back from Dunkin' Donuts with the coffee. When I worked. Doesn't seem to be a thing that's going on anymore. It does take money. It takes finding the right contractors. It takes finding the right road civil engineers to look at the roads and take care of them. We're not going to decide what gets built or not. We're going to decide where the money goes.
Thank you. And this will be the last one before the closing statements because we need to end at 8. So is PFAS, and I can't remember what it is, but it's called the forever chemicals in our water and in our environment, a health concern that is better handled on a state or regional basis or by individual local governments? How would you deal with PFAS? And we'll start with Mr. Cleaves.
Well, PFAS are, yes, they crept into our water, but I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't know enough about this to speak even remotely intelligently in this forum. So I will tell you that if it's something that we need to look at, I'll study up on it. Maybe one of you can stop me as we leave tonight and educate me. I have 1 or 2 brain cells that actually work, and we'll get it going. But I do know that as a rule, our groundwater is soaked with things that we don't want to be drinking. Personally, I have a whole house filtration system because my daughter kept getting a rash every time I gave her a bath. So I do worry about what's in our groundwater. We buy bottled water at my house. We use our filtration system strictly for cooking and bathing because when you cook something, it boils stuff out, we hope. But this state doesn't, at least our district, it may be the entire Middlesex 14th, but it's at least in Chelmsford, the water is not great. So I will try to do my best to learn more about this, and I'll get back to you.
Mr. Cataldo.
Thank you, Nancy. Polyfluoroalkyls, PFAS chemicals, were the #1 issue that I heard on the doors in North Acton. Just a couple of weeks ago, they measured at 21 and a half parts per trillion, which is 1.5 over what the EPA has set as its limit for safe drinking water. This affects disproportionately people with compromised immune systems and pregnant women. It is a major issue in our district. It's been found most because I think the testing is most advanced in Chelmsford and in North Acton, but it may be in other parts at concerning levels in our district as well. The local water districts, as great as they are not equipped to deal with this issue on their own. We do need the state and federal government's resources and project management expertise to address this issue. So that's the answer to the question. We can't just allow or require our town water districts, our local water districts, to deal with this all on their own. They won't be able to get it done. The problem is too big. We are still learning about this issue, the science of it, and the magnitude of the problem on an ongoing basis. We need the help. And other districts, other towns, other parts of Massachusetts are getting millions of dollars right now from the administration to address these issues. We have the problems here too. We need to draw the resources here too.
Thank you. And now we will go to the 90-second closing statements in the reverse order from the opening statements. So we will start with Mr. Cataldo, right?
Yes.
Mr. Cataldo, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Nancy, for moderating this discussion. Thank you to the League for giving us this opportunity. Thank you to everybody who's watching here and at home, and thanks, Rod, as well for this discussion. Our district is facing complex challenges, whether it involves mental health care, transportation, the affordability of aging with dignity in our district, or existential concerns about our climate or the economy. I've never backed down from a tough challenge, whether it was in the classroom with my special education students, ushering a national nonprofit through a pandemic, or holding powerful people to account in the federal courts of the United States. If you send me to Beacon Hill on your behalf, I will draw upon all of our shared wisdom and resources to deliver effective and inclusive representation to our community. And I will never forget that from the very beginning of this nation, from American independence to abolition, to the Affordable Care Act, to marriage equality, to climate legislation, the rest of the country has looked not just to Massachusetts for leadership, but to our community. And leadership is what I intend to provide as our next state rep. My name is Simon Cataldo, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaves, your closing statement.
Wow, how do I keep this under 90 seconds? Everyone here is from Concord or nearby, I guess. 90,390 days ago, people from your town, perhaps even some of your ancestors, gathered at the bridge a few miles down the road and sparked a revolution that changed the entire world. Not just here. It was bloody, it was hard. I'm going to ask and challenge every one of you to step out and change the single tyranny that we have in this state from a one-party system. They were fighting to defeat the tyranny of King George, who basically had sway over Parliament, because they didn't like the idea that they were being taxed without representation. Right now, we have a system in Boston that they can do anything they want with impunity, without regard to how you feel about it. You may like it, and there are some things I may like too. Vote for me and send me to Boston. I will at the very least spark a vigorous debate. I will be on your side. My name is Rod Cleaves, and I'm hoping for your vote in November.
And I thank you both for your willingness to run for office and for participating tonight. I will now turn the program back over to Nancy Comfrey to close.
Just a few things before we close. This is being recorded. As I said before, it will be available on the League's websites and will be available via cable access channels in your towns. There is no tampering with that tape in any way. It belongs to the League and should not be used for campaign purposes. The League is a national nonpartisan organization that's been working for more than 100 years in service of informing and encouraging active participation in government. If you appreciate what we do or you want to join us, please donate or join as a member. There's materials out at the table that you can do so, or at either of our websites as well. That's lwvcc.org and lwv-actonarea.org. I'd like to thank everybody for participating tonight. The candidates particularly, thank you for both being willing to give us your thoughts and for running for office. It benefits us all. Nancy, as moderator, thank you for your very capable abilities in organizing this. I thank you to the volunteers, particularly the core volunteers from both Concord and Acton, as well as people who joined us tonight. And thank you, the voters, for showing up tonight, and anyone online for going out there and voting, taking participation in your government seriously. Thank you. Have a good night.